So many voices in leadership right now are telling you to feel more. Be empathetic, be vulnerable, show warmth. Dr. Valentina Schneider spent years running controlled academic studies on exactly this problem, and what she found is that there are two kinds of empathy. One will make you stronger, a more effective leader, and the other one can have you making decisions that maybe you shouldn't be making. Most leaders may have no idea which one they're using. Join me as we discover the answers to these questions and many others here on the Change Agent Podcast. Thank you for coming back, Dr. Schneider. It's really great to see you again. I know since the last time that we spoke, you've had some pretty big changes in your professional path.
Hi, Eric. It's so good to see you again as well.
You too.
There have been some changes. So I transitioned from academia into the industry. So I'm working for a global leadership advisory firm now. And I'm super excited to be applying all of that theoretical knowledge about leadership in practice.
Yeah, that's exciting. Nothing makes it easier to transition than to get in and start practicing what you've learned and all the things that you've written about. The last time that we spoke, we covered a lot of pressing topics, from organizational behavior to assertiveness and much more. And today, I think I'd like to get more into the topic that I think that was really emphasized in the last episode, which was empathy. And it's such an important ingredient among many others, right, that makes leadership effective. And so to kind of move us into that, I want to talk about your transition and from academics into the real world. How does that application of leadership look to you in the real world now compared to how it did in the academic perspective?
Yeah, well, I would say now it is applied compared to before, where really a lot of the work was very theoretical. So we collected data, but most of the data was through surveys, and there wasn't that much one-on-one interaction with leaders. And what I really appreciate now is that it doesn't stop with the findings of like an effect. So that was super interesting before in academia to find out what's going wrong or what could be effective. But to me, there was always this part missing of, so what? What do I do with that now? And I always had these stories in my head of why I was researching these topics or how I thought they could be applied. But then the main focus just goes into trying to academically publish. So then through teaching, that would maybe come at a later stage. If you go into like a professor role, you can apply some of that knowledge. But now it's actually directly hands-on application, what to do with the research and the theoretical knowledge. And I'm super happy to say that a lot of it is actually being applied. And a lot of the leadership advisory firms in this world, they really look into scientific evidence. They validate their own measures, and they really try to find out what's going on as well, and then use that to help organizations and their leaders.
Has there been anything that you discovered that you were confident about in research that kind of turned out to be harder to apply in the real world than you expected?
I think what I'm finding is that it's even more role specific than in research. So I think in research, there's always this part in the end where you mention that the context plays a role. But I think what I'm learning is that in practice, everything is directly applied into the role and the industry and what the company is trying to achieve. So everything is really specific and customized to a specific client or leader. So it's even much more individualized than in research. But I guess that's one of the good parts about research, that you would look at such a broad range of leaders. So both have their advantage. Yeah.
And that sets up where I want to go really perfectly. I mean, we talked a lot about the academic part of that last time. And in there, we talked about empathy, and I brought that up in the intro. But what it really means for leaders is something that I think we need to hit more on in terms of just a community ship of leaders. Can you take us into what empathy really is in a leadership context, and what do most people get completely wrong about it, because some people just think it's, being too nice in a way.
Yeah, the whole thing with empathy started because I saw some differences in how empathy affects people and if it has some benefits or downsides to it. And then I did some overall investigation into how empathy is perceived in the industry, so in practice. And since around COVID, we were able to tell the difference immediately. Like the faculty members I talked and worked with, they mentioned that there was a clear difference from what, let's say, the MBA students, so actual people in leadership roles who were at London Business School, what in an exercise they brought up, what they wanted their leaders to have, what was important in leaders. And after COVID, suddenly empathy started to appear. And I've been to the classes and it came out in every session and in most of the groups. And that was a difference to COVID. And then when I look at let's say, the outlets like Harvard Business Review or Forbes, The Economist, they're all suggesting, big consultancies as well, like McKinsey company reports, they're all suggesting that empathy is one of the top skills for leaders to have. And this started in around 2019, 2021. And I'm still looking at this now because I just updated my slides, because I presented some of this research to some leadership advisors, and it's still very relevant. So it still comes up. And all of this is part of the whole growing demand and need for more emotional intelligence within leadership. As we can see, we see it in all kinds, company leaders, political leaders. Sometimes it feels like there's not a lot of empathy. Sometimes it feels like there's maybe too much empathy or that it's not helping. So I was always interested to find out if it's actually helpful or not. And that's how I got into the whole topic. And you have to stop me at any point because I can talk about that.
Well, no, that was actually a kind of a follow-up question that I had as you're talking. I'm thinking about this version of empathy that actually makes leaders less effective than more effective. And then I think you can have too much empathy, right?
Yeah. So I noticed it was actually quite a personal thing. I noticed when two of my good friends, who I would say are both quite empathetic, and they both went to a country where there's quite a high diverge between socioeconomic status between groups. And one of them still had a really good holiday, and the other one actually said she wouldn't go there again, and she didn't have a good time because it bothered her too much to see this difference between how people lived. And I was thinking, wow, that's actually not a good thing in that case, because it kept her from having a good holiday. So she couldn't enjoy herself. She might not have been rested enough coming back to work. And I applied this to a leadership context where I was thinking that maybe this kind of empathy is not good in a leadership role, because it keeps you from doing your actual job when you feel too much. Because a lot of what's out there and a lot of what you have to deal with as a leader can be quite tough or negative, challenging. So then I looked into empathy, and what we know from medical research and neuroscience is that there's at least two types of empathy, even though the world still talks about empathy as one thing. But medical research already differentiates cognitive and affective empathy, especially in terms of doctors or nurses working with patients, because cognitive empathy is the more rational part of understanding what someone else is feeling, whereas affective empathy is the part that's more about feeling someone's pain. So imagine in medicine, that would be a surgeon who's feeling too much with the patient, who might get distracted from the surgery. In leadership, that might be, let's say, a leader who's in the room and has to solve a conflict within the team, who gets sucked in too much, or who has to actually let some people go for the benefit of the whole company and can't do it, or really struggles with it because they feel the negative emotions, the sadness, the frustration too much. And then because there wasn't much research on this in a management field, I wanted to apply this distinction between cognitive and affective empathy to organizational behavior. And I investigated it throughout my whole years of research on different organizational levels. So I looked at how it impacts individuals when they experience these two types, so cognitive and affective empathy, how it impacts their conflict resolution skills, their individual leadership skills, how it impacts teams and team performance and team conflict. And then also what happens when leaders show these two different types of empathy, how they are perceived. And one more thing is that it's these expressions, cognitive and affective empathy, they're so lengthy. And there's a whole lot of other words going around or floating around that are quite tied together. They're not the same, but they're all a bit related. And I'm talking about things like perspective taking, or now there's also cognitive versus affective perspective taking, or sympathy, compassion, things like this. And it just makes it a bit more complicated to talk about what we mean. And I listened to a podcast by two of my favorite scholars, and I will call them influencers as well, Brené Brown and Adam Grant. And Brené suggested that we could still call the cognitive empathy, so that empathy stays important and positive, but that we call affective empathy enmeshment. And that's kind of what it is. So I kind of like it because it clearly shows that one can have potential downsides to it.
Yeah. And do you think when a leader goes into a situation, you mentioned this earlier about like something that's really against the grain, it's a bad day for someone, and a leader has to go in and try to project empathy to a degree, right? As they move in and they have to do something, and these two differences, right? There's a difference between those two, like you just mentioned. But when it becomes a situation which is really important for the leader to manage empathy in a way and understand the differences between cognitive and affective in a situation in which they have to let someone go. Can you explain a little bit about what a leader should be thinking about when they have to walk into one of those difficult situations regarding that?
Yeah, that's a good example where we can maybe explain what the differences between those two types of empathy would look like. So a leader who has to let go someone because they haven't been performing well or the company is downsizing, a cognitively empathetic leader would be aware that this is a difficult situation, might even know some of the backstories, like does this person have a family to support? Or does their visa depend on this job? Is any of that gonna have like a much bigger impact than, let's say, just losing their job? And to be aware of those and to frame the conversation in that way, to show understanding. So to try to explain why this decision has to be made, to try to alleviate the pain as much as possible by offering potential support, things like this. So just a cognitive understanding that this is a really, really tough situation. Maybe if the person starts to scream or to cry, you never know, to have understanding for that as well. Maybe to expect some emotional reaction, because you can really, if you're taking someone else's perspective, you can imagine how hard this must be. So maybe to let go some anger display that you weren't ready for. But then on the other hand, affective empathy is when you actually catch the emotion, and that happens through emotional contagion. So it's all neurobiology and neuroscience, where we actually pick up the emotions from someone else. And in that case, the leader letting go someone would also feel, let's say, the physical sensations, like maybe a heavy chest, or might also start to tear up or have like a something stuck in their throat, so it's hard for them to speak. If they are emotionally intelligent, I would say, they can recognize this as feelings of like stress or anxiety or sadness, depending on what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, that is probably not always helpful. So there are some positives, as my research shows. For example, leaders who show this, they are perceived as warmer, so more compassionate and kinder, but not necessarily as more competent. So it really depends on the goal of any situation, and in that case, I guess it is really about bringing the conversation to a useful end.
Yeah. Do you think, as you were talking about affective empathy, this idea that a leader, and I'm bringing this up as an example, I've seen this before. A leader has someone in the office, they're having a hard conversation. They've got an intent when they walk in the door about what they want to say, what their goals are for this particular conversation. And the affective empathy is so intense, is a good word, that maybe their goals change all of a sudden. To give you an example, I've seen people where they go in and they say, I'm going to really give this person a talking to, or I'm going to give them a piece of paper that could affect their career. I'm going to fire them. And then they get in there and the affective empathy is so heavy that they begin to feel such a powerful movement in the way that that person is projecting to them, how they feel. They start to feel sorry for them. Then maybe they think that this is too harsh of a punishment. Have you looked into that at all? I'm just curious.
Yeah, one of the very basic human instincts is to, if we feel negative emotions, to get rid of it because we don't like it. It feels uncomfortable. And when you catch someone else's emotions, what happens in that moment is, first of all, that you try to alleviate it for yourself. So you might be so taken by someone else's emotions, and it might make you feel so bad that it might not even be a rational decision in that moment to, let's say, maybe be more lenient. But you just try to get rid of this very bad, hard feeling for yourself. And one way out is to be nicer to the other person, which is why it's sometimes hard to get your way. It's probably why it's hard for parents to say no to their kids. But and that's exactly the point. And there are some other downsides of affective empathy, of emotional contagion. And those are that we don't catch the emotions of other people objectively or fairly. So we would always feel more of the feelings of someone who looks more similar to us, and of someone we like more. So I would be more effectively empathetic towards a friend than a stranger, or a closer colleague than a not so close colleague, of someone of my own gender and race and whatever demographic marker. And we catch the emotions more strongly of someone who shows them more strongly. So if you are in a conflict and you try to mediate and to solve it, and you have very high affective empathy, it's very likely that you will feel more strongly with the person who's the most angry or the loudest, and who shows their emotions more strongly, which is not always the person who's in the right. But that's how often people get their way, who just would show their emotion very strongly.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's so many stories that I can think of and instances where I've seen this happen. And just to hit on that thread of bad leadership, or at least the impact of effective empathy on leadership. You can be a great leader. You walk into a room, you've got all these ideas of what you're going to do to adjust a person's performance, so to speak. And then they sit down, there's an issue that maybe you weren't aware of. You become very effective to that. And now your whole entire game plan is out the window. And now instead of trying to help them get back on track, you're doing something completely different you didn't have to deal with in the beginning. And now you're just kind of making it up as you go. In terms of the expectations of what a leader has when they walk into a room, knowing that they have empathetic leadership capabilities, they know they're going to be empathetic to people. They know the differences between cognitive and effective.
Yeah.
but what they expect the results to have. There's going to be at some point where the empathetic leader may not have the expected results that they're going to get. Maybe the individual runs off into never land of anger.
Yeah.
Maybe they become very emotional. What's that connection? Like, how do you adjust for that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there's always there's a correlation between cognitive and affective. So usually both of those are prevalent in someone to a certain extent. There's actually only two populations, I would say, who have one but not the other. So just maybe an interesting side fun fact. But in like the clinical population of psychopaths, they often have high cognitive empathy, where they can really understand what someone else is feeling, maybe even the pain someone else feels, but they don't feel it in themselves, which is in itself part of the psychopathic behavior. And then on the other end, people who are highly affectively empathetic but don't necessarily understand where that's coming from is in people with autism, where they can, for example, also start to cry if someone else is crying. So they really feel what someone else is feeling, but they might not be able to cognitively understand that the other person is sad because they're being let go at the moment. But aside from these two clinical populations, let's just assume most leaders are somewhere in the middle. So they might have a bit more of one, bit more of the other. But the goal would be in these conversations to really stay on track with the cognitive empathy, because in all of the research I've done, we see that cognitive empathy is always helpful with everything. So the sidetracking that you mentioned probably comes from more enmeshment, so of feeling a little bit more than is probably useful in that situation. So I would say the goal is to actually get out of that again, get out of feeling what someone else is feeling, and settle in yourself, and then you should be able to go back to your goals of the situation. And one way that I've learned how to do that, which helps me a lot, is to, for example, focus on your skin. So maybe even like touching your fingers together, because it makes you kind of focus back on yourself. And that has the advantage that it reduces some of the emotional contagion. And even just a few seconds might help to find yourself again, maybe have like a little breath as well, and then to go back to the original goals. And I think it's always okay if you get derailed a little bit. That's okay. It's in general, it's good to have empathy, and it can be a superpower. But there is a way to come back to cognitive empathy and to use that to finish the conversation as you plan to do.
Yeah, that's great advice. I've done that myself, where I've been in a conversation as a leader.
Yeah,
something's really getting to me. It wasn't a sad conversation. It was kind of more of a conflictual one, a disagreement.
Yeah.
I didn't really agree with the individual saying, they weren't agreeing with me, and I understood that. I recognized where we were going, and as they were speaking, I want to say I was trying not to be disrespectful, but I did look away. I took a deep breath and I brought myself out of the situation for just 1 second.
Yeah.
And I came back to it, and it kind of reset things, and it kind of brought me back to it. And that's a really interesting kind of concept. This idea that it results in conflict, and all of this stuff is one side of that. But I think there's a lot of leaders out there who struggle with a lot more fundamental tension, where they believe that being warm and being authoritative are two different types of people. You can't be both of those at once.
Yeah.
That's some people have believed in that. What's an approach for a leader to integrate this idea of being warm and having authority at the same time, rather than having one or the other? We kind of talked about this in the last episode that you and I chatted about. So if anyone online wants to talk about that, they can go back and listen. But let's continue that conversation.
Yeah. So I actually think that's one of the two super impactful applications of this research, and one we just talked about before, for people who really have high affective empathy, what they can do to help them not to experience it so strongly and that it doesn't detriment them as much. And the other one, which I think is, I would say, even more important, at least to me, is that for exactly these leaders, and I think there's still quite a lot of leaders who maybe they didn't grow up with a lot of emotions having a space in the workplace, or who from own experience have seen if they show too much vulnerability, they might have perceived some disadvantages. And I think exactly for those, it is really, really good to be able to show them that they can be cognitively empathetic, because it doesn't have downsides. They are not perceived as less effective or less competent. So cognitive empathy is really the superpower. And I understand that if you don't have much to do with emotions, you don't want to feel so much floating around. I mean, we've just talked about all of the negative sides to that. I get it. You want to stay away from it. But there is a way to show empathy and to show understanding that will make you stay in your role as leader and be perceived as strong and competent. And from my research throughout all studies, my co-authors and me, we find that cognitive empathy helps to get more involved in conflict resolution. It also makes conflict resolution efforts more successful. There's a positive relationship to all individual types of leadership skills, like solving complex problems, empowering others, leading change. And on a team level, it also shows that even one person with high cognitive empathy can act as a mediator already and can lower dysfunctional types of conflict, and can improve overall team performance. And specifically on a leadership level, if you show cognitive empathy, so if you show that you understand what someone else is feeling, maybe just through acknowledging, okay, take 1 second to think about how must this situation be for the other person. They're being let go, or it's in a conflict. It's probably just as difficult for them as for you in a conflict. And to voice that, and just to acknowledge that this is a tough conversation, and this will allow you to still be perceived as warmer. So you will still be seen as a more compassionate leader, but it will also make you seem more competent and more effective. So that's really a way to keep your assertiveness intact and your strength as a directive leader. And you will still be perceived as more empathetic and more of a people person, if that's something that you might want to work on.
Yeah, that's the aspiration. I think that people need to understand that there's a personal touch to this leadership issue. Yeah. But there is a pattern, though. I kind of want to talk about this for a second. There's a pattern on the complete opposite end of that spectrum that makes all of this harder. And the studies that we've seen, you've probably run into this, about leadership, have a very specific line of thread of conversations about it, and that's narcissism. We see it throughout many everyday examples, let me put it that way. Can you give us your take just on this idea of narcissism in the workplace and how we can recognize that and how we might be able to address it?
Yeah, I guess narcissism in the workplace is just as hard as in the personal area, if not harder, because you don't have the chance to just stay away from the narcissistic person. I assume we're talking about dealing with a narcissist and not being one. Okay. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't make that clear, but yes, dealing with. Yeah.
I mean, it would be interesting as well if you find yourself to have some narcissistic traits, how to deal with it, because you're the only person who can actually do something about it.
That's true.
But yeah, I've come across narcissism in the same way as psychopathy, that it is actually there's let's say a negative correlation. So people with narcissism, they have lower empathy. And there is a positive correlation of narcissism with, let's say, leadership. which is interesting. But I think we know from personal experience that people who don't care about others, they just often go their way. They're not afraid to step on toes, and this is how they even get to a leadership position.
Right.
I would say one of the positive things is that the world, well, hopefully it's changing a little bit. I think we can still see some of the extremes of leaders with some narcissistic traits in power, leading big companies or countries. But I think I'm seeing on a lower level that people really don't want to work with narcissists. They want to have a nice work environment. We're spending so much time at work. So I think one of the difficult things is it might take a while to identify someone who's a narcissist, because they often can be quite charismatic. And also, let's say if it's one of your bosses, you just take orders from them because it's the hierarchical relationship as well. But I think there's quite a lot of interesting books about how to identify narcissists, or also how to deal with working with them. But yeah, not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, I will give you this example. I was in a conference not long ago, and someone said, this is the type of leadership you don't want. And all they did was flash photos across the slides. There was no script, there was no text. It was just photos of people that were recognizable. And the entire audience got this 10-slide presentation of 10 people that at some time or another have been known to demonstrate narcissistic behavior. And it reminded people the feelings they got when they saw the photos. And that was a powerful projection of, this is what you really don't want. Of course, narcissism has those positive attributes to it, but at the same time, more often than not, they're negative. And the last time that we spoke, I kind of want to shift gears to something a little bit different.
Well, one little response to that, because you mentioned the feeling, and I think that's also something I find quite interesting. Of course, that's not the scientist in me is saying, okay, well, you can't just rely on your feelings. But I think with narcissism, that is definitely a good first indication how someone makes you feel. And if they elicit the same feeling as seeing the picture of someone we clearly know is like a narcissistic leader, or you just feel like you're constantly doing something wrong, but rationally you might not be, then these could be first indicators that there's something like this going on. And it's tricky to identify, but usually our nervous system is quite good at identifying someone who isn't good for our nervous system, if we listen to it.
Yeah, that's what I tell people in the office, or I tell other young leaders that are coming up. They ask, how do I develop a leadership style? Or how do I know when, and they fill in the blank. And I say, how do you feel when a particular situation starts? And I think you're absolutely right with that. And last time we spoke, we talked about women in the workplace, and we talked about assertiveness. I want to kind of go back to that, because that was a really interesting conversation we had about that. In terms that female leaders often have this perception that they're going to be warm, that they're going to be kind, that they may lack the ability to project authority, even in C-suite roles. But for female leaders that have a team that expects that they're going to be kind, or the complete opposite, right? There's, in most cases, it's one or the other. They're either really kind, or they're, I think I can say this, single and have nothing else better to do than to make my life miserable. How can we handle that balance, or how can they handle that balance of kindness but authoritative presence without someone giving them a label? Because I think too often there's still this label. I want to talk about labels on women, because I think that that's still something that's, I mean, it's only been 2 months since I think we last talked, but it's still there.
Yeah. No, there's labels, and I think there will always be labels, unfortunately. And so far, we still live in a world where the leader label is closer to a male than a female. So you probably see a lot of women, what you describe, maybe overcompensating, because when you're too nice, you're not going to get into a leadership role. I think we've talked about that there needs to be a certain level of assertiveness to make it to a leadership role. But if it's, for example, if you had to portray this kind of assertiveness and it's not natural to you, it's easy to overcompensate and to get into the habit of bulldozing your way through. And then these are maybe some of the female leaders you're talking about. Unfortunately, maybe you're going to get bored of it, but the solution to the problem, again, is cognitive empathy in that case.
So we obviously see the importance of that.
Yeah, like we didn't really find gender effects, which was interesting because empathy is usually seen as a very gendered thing, that women are naturally a bit higher in empathy. But they have done some studies, actually, I think some more recent studies, that show that women are actually not more empathetic. It's a bit of how you're raised as well, and if you are asked. And I think if I don't know the journal, so I hope I'm not making things up now, but I read about a study where when you ask like the male participants to be more empathetic, they could just have the same level of empathy as the female participants. They just had to be told to do it, because maybe as a little boy, that's not something that you're immediately taught. It's more about being tough and not crying if you're hurt. Whereas little girls learn very early on to care about others. If another person is crying, we have to console them. So there's definitely a bit of a difference in how we grow up. But that's actually positive, because that means everybody can show empathy, can learn it. It's a good thing that cognitive empathy can also be trained. So there have been interventions in studies that actually raised empathy. So it's not like just a super stable trait where you can just kind of have the excuse of, oh, well, I guess I was just born with lower empathy. But I think especially for these women, both of those types, I would say staying away from affective empathy might prove especially useful for the women who are often seen as too nice to maybe get anywhere or get their way. And then cognitive empathy can help the women who are maybe seen as too harsh or not warm enough to, maybe just like the men as well. It's the same thing. They can be just, asked to show a little bit more perspective or to take the perspective of someone else, or to show that they try to understand, that they maybe incorporate their team's opinion, or they even take a little bit of time to think about what someone else might want or how they might perceive the situation. So yeah.
And that's a great segue into a different part of emotions than we talked about, which is anger. And when an individual walks into a room and they ask someone a question or whatever, we can say the scenario is maybe the person who's being asked the question doesn't understand what the person who's asking the question has gone through in that day or the day before.
Yeah.
And maybe the vice versa is also in play. No one knows what anybody's been up to in the last 24 or 48 hours.
Or in general, right?
Just in general. Yeah, we're all too busy. And so a leader walks into a room and someone really barks at him. And now you've got a kind of a, what do they call it? Backdraft, kind of a fire. It just explodes. And when anger enters that room, there's some real things that can happen there. What are some of the ways that we can control or handle someone who's demonstrated anger, or how can we use empathy to kind of impact that a little bit, to kind of calm that down a little bit?
Yeah, I think in that moment, it's really important not to match the emotion or to raise your voice as well. So we really don't need to fight fire with fire. And I think it takes the fire out of anyone if you just stay calm, if you have the ability to. So I would try to diffuse it by saying something like, okay, maybe we can restart this. That was not a good start. I can see you're frustrated. Do you want to tell me what happened in a calm voice?
Yeah.
Something like this. So
This kind of goes back to your contagion statement.
yeah, like in that case, you're not really catching. You're trying to stay with yourself and not taking on the anger going around. And the studies we did like in look at anger or frustration or sadness. So anger is definitely one of the emotions that can really well be met with empathy. Um, and I think the angry person, anger is usually when you still have a feeling of control. So it comes up when you feel like there's something you can do about the situation. So if the person you meet with anger actually acknowledges you and acknowledges that there must be some frustration, that already satisfies us a little bit of the goal of, I can do something about it. So if my boss is then saying, oh, I see there's some frustration, let's talk about it, then that should automatically lower the anger, because the goal of let's say solving the cause for the anger is, at least in the first instance, it's actually satisfied. Yeah.
You know, I think going back to something we talked about in the very beginning, which is we get all this good information. We have to practice this. You know, this is something that we can hear on a podcast. We can read about it in a book. We can see it in a leadership conference or in a classroom. But you have to really practice this. This is a skill that you're just not going to be able to whip out and, generally speaking, make it work.
Empathy.
Yeah, it's difficult. And I think the other side of that spectrum, and I'll give you a moment because I know that you got something around you want to talk about. But on the other side of that is being too open rather than being closed or being angry. And there's a vulnerability in that too, that vulnerability question. Did you have a point you wanted to make before I go into that?
Oh, yeah, I think I just wanted to say that, you know, in the end, everything needs to be learned. It's not automatic. Yeah, but just little by little, I think even if you want to get anywhere in life, you have to put in a little bit of effort. And just little things. The good thing is empathy comes up so much, like in any situation that involves people. You can practice with your friends. You can practice in easier situations. You can start when it's not too hard for you to have empathy and to take a second to think about what maybe your partner or your really good friend has been going through before you answer. And then that becomes like a muscle that's trained. And then at one time, hopefully you can be able to apply that in a situation and even have empathy with someone who you might find hard to have empathy with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes when we're leaders, we want to build trust, especially if we move into a new environment, we have new people and we want to build trust with them. And in often cases, I've seen this happen where the leader will think that the fastest way for me to build trust will be to open myself to them, to be vulnerable, because it does show, hey, I'm trusting you with my feelings or my statements. But there's a set of genuine risks that go with that. And there's a point where we try to really need to attempt at least to balance openness and vulnerability. The risks of being too open. What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, so that's also a topic I was very interested in because the demand for vulnerability is also going up, also based on some of Brené Brown's work, and dare to be vulnerable. So I also wanted to investigate. There's also a generally higher demand for leaders to be vulnerable, but obviously vulnerability basically means trusting someone to be able to hurt you. Even if you don't have full control and you're not sure. So it is a risky situation. So it's hard for anyone. And we actually specifically investigated organizationally induced vulnerability. So we looked at what happens when leaders are specifically asked by, let's say, company initiatives to show more vulnerability and how it's picked up by the employees. And we generally see a surprising effect that it needs to be authentic. So that's one big thing. So if you're really, really not good with being vulnerable and let's say admitting to mistakes as like an example, or sharing some insecurities you have, if that's not something you do and then you try to fake your way through it because the organization asks for it, that can be picked up, and it's actually more effective to then just not do it. But if we take out the organizationally induced part, we actually do see that vulnerability is effective, because it improves psychological safety. I don't think I would admit to like a insecurity or show my weaknesses if I don't see my leader doing the same thing, because they have power over me. So they are in this unique position where they can be a good role model. They will probably not lose their job if they show some level of vulnerability. And again, it doesn't have to be the full thing at once. But just mentioning, oh wow, I didn't know that, or oh okay, that's something new to me, or wow, I did that wrong, or last year this happened to me. That kind of allows more room for error and to help everyone get into a growth mindset. That it's not, this failure culture, that failure is so bad. Like, everybody makes them and we're just trying to hide them. But would you rather have employees who hide their mistakes or who share them so you can maybe work together as a team to solve them?
This is really good insight. Not long ago, I had an individual who moved into the same leadership space that I was in with the same group of leaders. And what I learned with them when I moved into there was that I gave them certain vulnerabilities. I made it available, and it backfired on me. And I learned that I needed to control that level in this particular environment with these individuals. And when the new leader came in, they didn't ask me for my advice, but I did proselytize it for them, just unsolicited. So I said, look, I was like, if you want to be successful in this particular environment, be careful with how vulnerable you make yourself. Not everybody here is going to be your friend. And so be careful what you show, and you have to know who's who in this game. And that's a common environment, I think, that many people see, especially in the upper management realm of corporations, so to speak. And I guess it can go anywhere, but these new leaders, they learn sometimes the hard way. And so that brings me kind of to this, I would call it the honest shift, if you will. If we had a leader that was listening right now and they had to take one thing away from this conversation you and I are having, what do you think that would be?
To vulnerability or our whole conversation?
The whole thing.
Okay. I would say look into cognitive empathy. It can help with so many situations, in so many difficult situations, especially as a leader. And it's one of the few things that is safe to do, which I think is quite nice, because often things have like a pro and a con, and then it's situation specific or gender specific. But cognitive empathy is one thing that we can all do more of and show more of. And then together we can just make a really, a nicer work environment for everyone, without losing our edge.
Yeah, great. Cognitive empathy, everyone. That's what you need to be doing. So before I close out, Dr. Schneider, I'd like to always try to end up with something a little bit personal, because leadership is not just what we teach. It's who we are, it's what we live, and you are a brilliant person at this topic. What's challenging you, or what has challenged you, and what are you learning from it?
Wow, right now I'm actually being challenged in so many ways, because it's a really different work environment for me. I think especially time pressure, it's quite challenging, which I didn't really have that much before. So before I was working for myself, which has the advantage that everything you do for yourself. But if you don't do something, then you're the only person who has a disadvantage. And because I really do care about people, and that includes colleagues and clients and everyone I work with, I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself, but it's also, I mean, it's coming from multiple directions. So right now I'm being challenged to adjust to this new environment. Yeah, I'm still learning on the go every day.
Mm-hmm. As we do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I still learn all the time. I just do it all the time. At work right now, I'm in a new role and I see new things happening and I can recognize them. And yeah. It's never going to stop. You're always going to be challenged and you're always going to find new things you have to overcome and adjust the way that you do things.
But I really do like the people who see these and who try to learn and who are not just accepting the way everything is. And I think that really makes for a good leadership trait as well, and to stay humble in the process.
Yeah, exactly. And for example, this conversation we're having today is going to be something that someone's going to listen to and they're going to get so much out of this. I know they will.
That would be my dream.
Yeah, well, it will happen, I assure you. So if you're out there listening, please make sure you comment on these videos to let Dr. Schneider know that the effort that we're putting into this really is not for naught. So Dr. Schneider, thank you so much.
Just so much fun, not purely effort. It's always nice to talk with you, and it structures my own thinking, and it's really lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so very, very, very much for coming back to joining us on the second run, and for being with us both times. I mean, the perspectives that you bring, the experiences that you bring, especially going from academic into real world application, is something that I think many people just need to understand that is so important and so valuable. So
give me a few more years and then I'll come back with all of the practical insights.
We will definitely be keeping up with you on those things and inviting you back as often as we can. Thank you so very much again for joining us. It's been great having you, Dr. Schneider. We will, of course, put all of your information that we can down in the show notes. And if anybody has any questions and they push them to us, we will certainly push them to you. And maybe we can get those answered in the comments wherever this podcast is posted.
Sounds great. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.